Hello Internet, welcome back to Thrums of Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you, the Abyss, about books, movies, music that I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. Today I'm going to be talking about Dennis Cooper's book, Frisk. This is the second book in the George Miles sequence. I did a video about the first book in the George Miles sequence, Closer, earlier this year, and in that video I said that I admired Closer, but that it disturbed me to such an extent that I wasn't convinced I would read the rest of the series. However, I got such interesting comments on that video that made me so curious about the rest of his work that I resolved to read the whole sequence and to make subsequent videos about it. I might actually make a video responding to comments about Dennis Cooper's books at some point because everybody has such interesting and varied takes about what it is he's doing. That won't be today, that'll be when I've read some more of his books. But I'd like to say if you commented on that video, even if your comment was not generous towards me, you're one of the reasons why I'm continuing to read these books. So I guess thank you. If you can say thank you for something like this. A couple of caveats. I will be spoiling the book completely for those who haven't read it. It's very short. If you're interested to read it, just read it, come back. Another caveat, I haven't been able to really structure my thoughts around the video, and me talking now is me processing the content of this book. So I might contradict myself a little, it might be a little bit out of order or a little bit fragmented. So I don't know if you've got to forgive me, but just accept it if you can. All right, the first thing to say is that Frisk is much more obviously metafiction than Closer. It's metafictional in several different ways. One of the ways is that the narrator and apparent writer of the book is a fictional Dennis Cooper, or at least a man called Dennis, who is exploring fetishism, violence, killing, and gay sex in the way that Dennis Cooper does in his work. But the Dennis of the book appears to be actually obsessed with killing people, sexually obsessed with killing people. Another way in which it's metafictional is that it plays a lot with form. You have the narrator character, I, Dennis, but the third person characters that Dennis is involved with have interiority. They are described in a very omnipotent way so that the I character, Dennis, can tell you what another person is thinking when that person is reading a letter that he sent, for example. It's also very playful formally. It starts off with a description of some photographs, it ends with a description of some photographs, and within the text there's a failed attempt at a novel, there are some letters, there are also these kind of third person perspectives, as I mentioned. The overall story, essentially, like narratively, is that Dennis, as a young teenager, sees some pornographic photographs that appear to be a dead boy, and that these photographs, though they horrify him initially, haunt his sexuality in such a way that he becomes obsessive about killing somebody, and specifically somebody who looks like that boy. So a particular type of tall, boyish brunette. He has a boyfriend for a period of time, Julian, who's maybe the closest he comes to a real relationship, and they engage in threesomes together where the guy is always stoned and out of his head, and they kind of explore his body and his smells and the touch of him in a quite antiseptic, dissociated type of way. Dennis Cooper has a way of talking about the body and about sex that is so distanced and weird and unerotic, and it's the eroticism of his writing is purely in the fetish. So it's like any of these people represent a type, and they, as types, are only interesting in the way that he can understand their body or their being quite detached from their personality or their interiority. The only interiority he's interested in is the interiority of their bowels, their intestines, what it would be like if he opened them up. In that way, it's a book not just about fantasy, like Closer was about fantasy, but it's a book about obsession, obsessive fantasy. And it's a book, to me, about how becoming lost in your own fantasies and interior obsessions isolates you and draws you away from the world. The Dennis character of the book is almost schizoid in his interpersonal style. He's looking for somebody who could understand him enough that he would have the courage to get beyond his moral squeamishness and actually begin to kill people. One thing that is really interesting about this book, formally, and quite clever, although wasn't enjoyable to me initially, is how the failed novel that the character Dennis is writing is used in the book, because Dennis has a crush on a boy who works in a local mall, and this boy is then murdered by an actor. And Dennis immerses himself in all the details of the killing, and he tries to write a novel about these events, imagining them. And parts of this novel are placed into the text, interspersed with an account of him going to visit a hustler in New York. And this novel is bad. The writing is significantly worse than a lot of the rest of the book. And as I was reading it, I was kind of tricked into thinking that Dennis Cooper actually did try to write this bad novel and he's now using it in this book. But as the book goes on and the Dennis character begins to describe appalling murders that he's committing together with two other guys in Amsterdam, it's like this imagined novel contrasts with the reality of the appalling crimes that he's carrying out, that get to a point where it's difficult for me personally to read. You know, it's at the absolute limit of what I can tolerate reading about violence and sexual assault. But then it transpires right towards the end of the book, huge spoiler alert, that the character Dennis has never committed these crimes. He's only imagined them and he's written them in these letters to his friends. So it's like the contrast with the first fiction and then this later fiction that's so well executed that it seems real is kind of part of the trick that the book is pulling on you, that you almost believe that the character Dennis is the writer Dennis Cooper, and has Dennis Cooper actually murdered people? It really feels at a certain point like he has. And then when the characters in the book finally expose the fact that this was a fiction, to me it was a huge relief. I was like, oh, thank God none of these people actually were killed. Oh, you know, there's a young boy, like a 10-year-old boy. I was like, okay, thank God he wasn't killed. But then obviously the point that the book is making is that it was always a novel. So even if the boy died in the novel or he didn't die in the novel, he never actually died. This was all just words on paper. It was all fantasy. It was all an exercise. It all happened inside your mind. So it's kind of metafictional levels about fantasy and what's acceptable and what's beyond acceptable and what is real, and when does a fantasy become so intense that it's like a reality. And this also underlines this initial experience that I wonder whether maybe is drawn from life, of having seen these photographs as a 13-year-old of a dead boy, believing they were real and having your life changed by it, but then discovering that these two were staged. And the end of the book, the photographs at the end of the book, are staged photographs that are described as clumsy, obviously fake. And again, the contrast between the photographs at the beginning and the photographs at the end are like Dennis's failed novel and the letters, where the letters are convincing, whereas the novel is not. There are more explicit references to the AIDS epidemic in this book than there are in Closer. And I think that you can guess that Dennis Cooper's experiences with people in his social circle having become sick and died is part of the inspiration also for this detached, lonely, disturbed relationship to love and the body and sex. He keeps saying this at the beginning of the book, you know, I'm sure I've got AIDS or cancer. And it's a kind of almost a joke. There are actually a lot of very blackly funny moments in the first half of this book before it becomes completely abject. And in that way, it's more arch, it's more funny than Closer. Closer to me was more emotionally painful, I guess because it was about kids, it was about teenagers. This book was horrifying on another level, but it didn't have the same deep, painful, almost affectionate side that Closer had. There is a young guy in this book, Kev, who's like the human heart of the book, who in a way tries to save or tries to relate to the Dennis character. But the way the book frames that is sort of doomed in a way. And something that I wanted to share with you is that the day after I finished reading it, I went to the Munch Museum in Oslo and I saw this painting called The Murderer, which is on the screen now. And it made me think about how the narrator of this book, the Dennis character, it's like he's gone so far into his desire to kill and to find out what it means to kill and how it feels to kill, that he, although he's not done it, he's sort of left society. He has no sense of community. He has no way of feeling connection. And I wondered if this book also might be influenced by the story of Dennis Nilsen, the English murderer, because I read the book Killing for Company, which is a biography of him or a book about him, and the way that he sexually obsessed about one particular type of guy and also kind of slowly worked his way up to doing things in the way that the character in this book appears to. It just kind of, there were a lot of resonances there, so maybe there's some inspiration. I mean, Dharma is the obvious inspiration, but the character in this book feels more like Nilsen. I see this book as an extreme example of metafiction, where the drawing of attention to the fictional nature of the book comes as a massive relief at the same time as it asks questions about why the text exists, why we're drawn to read it, what the function of this fantasy collaboration that the writer is doing with the reader is, about distance between the reader and the text, in the way that different people in the text respond to the letters differently, and here we're sitting reading them also, and also the distance between the narrator and the writer, where the writer clearly is exploring or trying to understand the motivations, the world, the perspective of a person obsessed with murder through a character who is totally focused upon it. This is basically the end of my discussion of Frisk, but there's a couple of things I want to say in closing. One of them is that somebody said in the comments on the previous video, that I didn't know enough about Cooper or his work to really understand him. I want to say I think that's kind of disingenuous, because when Closer and Frisk were published, nobody knew anything about Cooper. I mean, maybe if you read zines and you knew his poems, you knew a little about him, but it's only subsequently that he's gained the status that he has. So going in fairly cold to these books, I'm reading them in the way that I would have read them when they were published. And I still don't totally understand the George Miles sequence yet, but I can start to see these themes about fantasy, distance, loneliness, isolation, fetishization, and a sort of protective veneer of boredom and distance, at the same time contrasted with some of the most extreme desires, imaginings, tendencies, urges. I'll be interested to read the third one. I imagine it's completely different based on the first two, so I'll be interested to see what it's all about, although I do expect that there will be some eating of feces and probably some extreme violence. Please do jump in the comments if you'd like to talk to me about the book. I'd be really interested to hear your perspectives on it. I'm sure there's tons I missed because these books are really complex. So I'd love to just carry on the conversation down there in the discussion section. Thanks so much for listening. I hope to see you again. Lots of love.